Why was everyone laughing at a simple piece of plastic? The morning air at Fort Crestwood carried the bite of early autumn, sharp and clean, cutting through the Virginia hills like a promise. Sarah Mitchell stood at the main gate, her canvas bag hanging loose from one shoulder, her jeans faded at the knees, her jacket showing signs of years that nobody here would understand. She was 28, but her eyes held something older, something that had seen too much and learned to carry it quietly. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no fuss, no ceremony. No makeup softened the angles of her face. She didn't need softening. She needed to be here. The base stretched behind the checkpoint like a small city, all purpose and precision. Helicopters droned in the distance, their blades chopping through morning silence. Soldiers moved with that particular military rhythm, every step intentional, every movement saying something about rank and role. Sarah stood apart from all of it. Her sneakers were scuffed. Her posture was straight but unremarkable. Nothing about her screamed authority or demanded attention. She was just a woman at a gate holding a card. The card was black, smooth. No barcode scratched across its surface, no ID number stamped in official fonts. Just a faint triangular emblem that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, a soft glow that caught the light in ways that shouldn't be possible. She held it between her fingers like it was the most natural thing in the world. The guards saw her and made their judgment in 3 seconds flat. Private Jenkins was young, maybe 22, with a buzz cut so fresh you could still see the razor lines and a smirk that came too easy. He took one look at Sarah's civilian clothes and decided she wasn't worth his time. His partner, Corporal Diaz, stood broader and louder, the kind of guy who filled space with his voice before you even noticed his face. They exchanged a glance, that wordless communication soldiers develop when they think they're dealing with someone who doesn't belong. "Can I help you?" Jenkins asked, but his tone made it clear he had no intention of helping anyone. Sarah extended the card. Her movement was calm, unhurried. "I'm here on orders." Jenkins took the card, turned it over in his hands like he was examining a child's toy. The emblem pulsed faintly, that strange triangular glow catching the overhead lights. He held it up to Diaz. "What is this? A gift card? You here to buy groceries?" Diaz laughed, the sound harsh in the morning quiet. "Looks like something from a cereal box." Sarah didn't react. Her face remained still, her breathing even. She'd been here before, in different forms, different contexts. The dismissal was always the same. The assumptions were always immediate. Woman in civilian clothes equals mistake, equals someone who wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge of operations," Sarah said, her voice low but clear. "You need to turn around," Jenkins shot back. He waved the card in front of her face, close enough that she could feel the air move. "This isn't Comic-Con, lady. This is a military installation." Behind them, Sergeant Ruiz emerged from the guard station, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with practiced assessment. She was older than the two men, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of face that had stopped suffering fools years ago. She walked over, her boots crunching on the gravel, and snatched the card from Jenkins's hand. "What's going on?" Her voice carried authority, but when she looked at the card, her expression shifted to something closer to contempt. "Where'd you get this?" "It was issued to me," Sarah said. "Issued?" Ruiz turned the word into mockery. She held the card between two fingers like it might contaminate her. "By who?" "The Wizard of Oz." The three guards laughed together now, their voices echoing off the concrete barriers that lined the checkpoint. Other soldiers were starting to notice, heads turning, conversations pausing. Sarah became the center of attention she hadn't asked for. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside," Ruiz said, her tone shifting into something more official, more final. "You're holding up legitimate personnel." "I am legitimate personnel." "Sure you are." Jenkins grabbed Sarah's canvas bag from her shoulder, the strap sliding down her arm. "Let's see what else you got in here." He unzipped it roughly, dumping the contents onto a metal table beside the checkpoint. A worn notebook fell out, its pages yellowed and dog-eared. A single pen, nothing else. Diaz picked up the notebook, flipped through it with exaggerated care. "What's this, your diary? Dear diary, today I pretended to be a soldier." More laughter. Sarah's jaw tightened for just a moment, so brief you might miss it if you weren't watching. Then her face smoothed again. "You'll want to scan that card." "Oh, I'll scan it," Ruiz said. She walked to the checkpoint station, where a security scanner sat mounted to the desk. It was military grade, designed to read everything from standard ID cards to classified access badges. She slapped Sarah's card against the reader with deliberate force, expecting nothing but an error message. The scanner lit up purple. Not blue, not green, purple, a color that made Ruiz's hand freeze mid-motion. Then the voice came, mechanical but clear, cutting through the morning air like a siren. "Override level Zeta. Welcome, Commander Mitchell." The laughter died so fast it left a vacuum in its wake. Jenkins's smirk collapsed. Diaz's hand, which had been rifling through Sarah's notebook, went still. Ruiz stared at the scanner like it had just spoken in a language she didn't understand. The purple light reflected in her eyes, turning her confusion into something sharper, something that looked almost like fear. "What the hell?" Jenkins started, but the system wasn't finished. Every screen at the checkpoint went black. The main security terminal, the monitors displaying base activity, even the small tablet Diaz had been using to log entry times. All of them blinked out simultaneously, and for 3 seconds, Fort Crestwood's entire gate system ceased to exist in any digital form. Then they all came back online at once, and every screen showed the same thing. Sarah Mitchell's face, younger by maybe 5 years, her eyes harder, her expression carved from stone. Below the photo, text scrolled in red capitals: "Clearance level Zeta. Authorized for command override. Operation Dragon Eye Veteran." Ruiz dropped the card. It hit the concrete and lay there, still glowing faintly, its triangular emblem pulsing like a quiet heartbeat. Sarah bent down and picked it up. Her movement was slow, deliberate. She dusted it off against her jeans and slipped it into her jacket pocket. When she looked up at the 3 guards, her expression hadn't changed. Still calm, still patient. But something in her eyes had shifted, some door opening just enough to let them see what stood behind it. "I said I'm here on orders," she repeated, and this time her voice carried weight that had nothing to do with volume. Before anyone could respond, Captain Peterson burst from the guard station, his face already red, his uniform pressed so sharp it could cut. He was in his 40s, all polish and protocol, the kind of officer who measured his worth in how clean his boots stayed. He took one look at the screens, at Ruiz frozen beside the scanner, at Sarah standing there with her scuffed sneakers and faded jacket, and his expression twisted into something between confusion and rage. "What the hell is going on out here?" He jabbed a finger at the screens. "Who crashed my system?" "Sir, Ruiz started, but Peterson wasn't listening. He turned on Sarah, stepping close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You think you can walk onto my base and hack our security? You think this is a game?" "I didn't hack anything," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Your system recognized my clearance." "Clearance?" Peterson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, I don't care what toy you brought with you. You don't waltz onto a military installation without proper credentials, without a uniform, without—" "Without what?" Sarah interrupted, and for the first time there was an edge to her voice. Not anger, something colder. "Without permission from you." Peterson's face went darker. He looked at Jenkins, at Diaz. "Restrain her. We'll sort this out after she's secured." The 2 soldiers moved before Sarah could protest. Jenkins grabbed her left arm, Diaz her right. Their grips were tight, professional, designed to control without causing visible injury. Ruiz produced handcuffs from her belt, and the metallic click of them closing around Sarah's wrists was loud enough to make nearby soldiers turn and stare. "I have level Zeta clearance," Sarah said, her voice still calm even as the cuffs bit into her skin. You're making a mistake." "The only mistake," Peterson said, stepping back to admire his handiwork, "is you thinking you could come here and pull some kind of stunt. We'll let it sort out whatever virus you uploaded, and then we'll see about pressing charges." They marched her toward a holding room, her bag left behind in the dirt, her notebook pages fluttering in the breeze that rolled down from the hills. Soldiers watched from their posts, their faces showing everything from confusion to amusement. A woman in handcuffs, civilian clothes, being led through a military base like a criminal. The scene wrote its own story in their minds. Sarah didn't struggle. She didn't argue. She just walked, her head up, her steps measured, the handcuffs clinking softly with each movement. She'd been underestimated before. She'd been dismissed, mocked, ignored. This was just another checkpoint, another test she hadn't asked for but would pass anyway. The holding room was exactly what you'd expect. Bare concrete walls, a single metal chair bolted to the floor, one fluorescent bulb flickering overhead like it couldn't decide whether to stay lit or give up entirely. They sat her down, still cuffed, and Peterson stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, radiating the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. "Someone get it in here," he barked into his radio. "I want to know how she compromised our system." Specialist Tours arrived minutes later, a tech expert with thick glasses and the permanent expression of someone who believed he was the smartest person in any room. He set up a laptop on a folding table, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up security logs. "Sir, I'm not seeing any breach," Tours said after a few minutes, his voice hesitant. "The system registered her card as legitimate." "That's impossible." "I'm telling you what the logs show." Tours turned the screen so Peterson could see. "Override level Zeta. It's the highest clearance in the database. Higher than generals. Higher than—" He stopped, his eyes widening as he read further. "Sir, this clearance level requires Pentagon authorization. Direct authorization." Peterson's jaw worked silently. He looked at Sarah, sitting there with her hands cuffed behind her, her jacket creased from rough handling, her expression giving away nothing. "Who are you?" he asked, and for the first time his voice held something other than anger. Sarah met his eyes. "I told you, Commander Sarah Mitchell, Operation Dragon Eye." The name meant nothing to Peterson, but Tours went pale. Actually pale, like blood draining from his face in real time. His hand stopped moving on the keyboard. "Dragon Eye," Tours whispered. That's classified above my level, that's." He looked at Sarah like he was seeing her for the first time. "You were there." Sarah didn't answer. She just held Peterson's gaze, waiting. That's when the phone rang. Not Tours' cell phone, not Peterson's radio. The red phone on the command desk in the corner, the one with no buttons, no dial pad. The one that only received calls, never made them. The one that nobody touched unless they absolutely had to. Peterson stared at it like it was a snake. It rang 3 times before he finally crossed the room and picked it up. "Captain Peterson," he said, trying to sound confident and failing. The voice on the other end was loud enough that Sarah could hear it from across the room. It was deep, rough, carved from years of command. "Did you just put handcuffs on Sarah Mitchell?" Peterson's face went through several colors in rapid succession. "Sir, I." "Yes or no, Captain?" "Yes, sir, but—" "She's the last surviving operative from Operation Dragon Eye. She's got clearance that predates this base. She's got authority that I can't override, and I'm a 3-star general. Do you understand what you've done?" Peterson's hand shook on the receiver. "Sir, she didn't have proper identification, She had a level Zeta card. That's more identification than you'll ever carry. Now get those cuffs off her, get her the resources she needs, and pray to God she doesn't file a report about how you treated her." The line went dead. Peterson stood there, receiver still pressed to his ear, his face now completely drained of color. Slowly, mechanically, he hung up the phone. He turned to Ruiz, who had been standing silent in the doorway. "Uncuff her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ruiz moved forward, her hands trembling slightly as she produced the key. The handcuffs clicked open, and Sarah brought her arms forward, rubbing her wrists where the metal had left angry red marks. Peterson couldn't look at her. "Ma'am, we didn't know." Sarah stood. She was shorter than Peterson, smaller than Ruiz, but somehow in that moment she filled the entire room. "I don't need your apology," she said quietly. "I need your cooperation. I'm here for a reason, and every minute you waste is a minute we don't have." She walked past them, out of the holding room, back into the morning light. Her bag was still where they'd dropped it, lying in the gravel with her notebook soaked in a puddle. She picked it up, water dripping from the pages, and slung it over her shoulder without complaint. The soldiers at the gate stood at attention now, their earlier mockery replaced by something that looked like shame. Jenkins tried to meet her eyes as she passed, but she didn't give him the satisfaction. She just walked through the now open gate, her steps steady, her silence more powerful than any words she could have spoken. Behind her, Peterson watched her go, his career flashing before his eyes, wondering how he'd explain this in his report, knowing there was no explanation good enough for what he'd just done. Sarah didn't look back. She had work to do. She always had work to do. And whether they respected her or not, whether they believed her or not, she would do it. Because that's what she'd always done. That's who she was. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It just stands there, waiting for the world to catch up. What would make an entire operations room go silent in 3 seconds? Sarah walked into the operations building like she'd done it 1,000 times before, which she had, just not at this base, not with this particular collection of officers who thought they knew how the world worked. The building was functional, all clean lines and fluorescent lighting, maps spread across tables, screens glowing with real-time data feeds, soldiers moving with purpose between workstations. It smelled like coffee and stress, and the particular brand of confidence that came from never being wrong about anything important. Colonel Vance stood at the center of it all, tall and gray-haired, with the kind of presence that made junior officers straighten their spines without being told. He was reviewing something on a tablet when Sarah entered, her canvas bag still damp from the puddle, her wrists still bearing faint marks from the handcuffs. He looked up, assessed her in 2 seconds flat, and his expression shifted from curiosity to recognition to something harder to define. "Commander Mitchell," he said, and every head in the room turned. The typing stopped. The quiet conversations died. 24 pairs of eyes locked onto the woman in civilian clothes standing in their operations center. "Colonel." Sarah's voice was even, professional. She reached into her jacket and produced the black card, holding it up so the nearest scanner could read it. The system acknowledged her immediately, screens flickering as her clearance level populated across the network. Several officers looked away from their monitors to stare at her directly, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they thought they knew. Vance nodded slowly. "I got the call from General Crowley, told me you'd be arriving." He gestured to a workstation near the back of the room. "We've got everything set up for you. Full access, direct line to the Pentagon if you need it." "Thank you." Sarah moved toward the workstation, aware of every eye tracking her movement. She could feel their judgment, their confusion, their resistance to accepting that this woman, this unremarkable-looking person in jeans and a faded jacket, had authority that exceeded most of theirs combined. She sat down, pulled her damp notebook from her bag, and opened it to a page covered in neat handwriting and technical diagrams. The water had blurred some of the ink, but she didn't seem bothered. She just set it aside to dry and turned her attention to the computer. Behind her, the whispers started, quiet enough that she wasn't supposed to hear them, loud enough that they wanted her to. "That's her, Lieutenant Doyle," a supply officer with a round face and a tendency to gossip, leaned toward his neighbor. "Doesn't look like much." "Crowley vouched for her," someone else muttered. "But Dragon I thought that operation was a myth." "Probably exaggerated. You know how these intelligence types are. They sit in air-conditioned bunkers and take credit for what real soldiers do in the field. Sarah's fingers didn't pause on the keyboard. She'd heard worse. She'd been called worse. Words were just noise until you gave them power. She pulled up classified files, her clearance opening doors that most people in this room would never see. Mission reports from operations that officially never happened. Intelligence assessments from assets that officially didn't exist. She scanned through them with the efficiency of someone who'd done this work when her life depended on it, when every second of delay meant someone else died. Major Lyall appeared at her shoulder without warning, a broad-shouldered officer with perfectly groomed hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was the kind of man who measured his success by how many people deferred to him, and Sarah wasn't deferring. "Commander Mitchell," he said, his tone friendly in a way that set off warning bells. "I'm overseeing cybersecurity protocols. If you need any assistance accessing our systems." "I don't." Sarah didn't look up from her screen. Lyall's smile tightened. "I'm sure you're very capable, but our systems are highly specialized. It might be beneficial to have someone familiar with our specific architecture. I wrote half the protocols you're using." Now she did look up and her gaze was steady, unblinking. "The other half were developed by colleagues of mine. I don't need assistance, Major, but thank you." The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. Lyall's smile vanished entirely. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked away with careful dignity, his back rigid with bruised ego. More whispers, more glances. Sarah kept working. An hour passed, then two. She filled 3 pages of her notebook with new diagrams, cross-referencing data from multiple sources, building something in her mind that nobody else could see yet. Officers came and went, conducting their own business, but they all found reasons to walk past her workstation, to glance at her screen, to try and figure out what she was doing, and why someone from outside their command structure had been given free rein in their operations center. Lieutenant Baxter, a junior officer with loud opinions and a habit of dominating conversations, finally couldn't contain himself. He walked up to Sarah's workstation with exaggerated casualness, coffee cup in hand, and leaned against the desk beside her. "So, Commander," he said, drawing out her rank like it was a joke between friends, "Dragon Eye must have been pretty exciting. Bet you saw some action." Sarah saved her work before responding. When she turned to look at him, her expression was polite blank. "It was a mission. We completed it." Right, Baxter sipped his coffee. "But come on, you can tell us what you actually do, analyze intel, coordinate logistics." His tone made it clear what he thought: desk work, safe work, nothing that earned real respect. "I was field operations," Sarah said simply. "Field operations." Baxter's grin widened. "So you were what, radio support, medical?" Around them, other officers had stopped pretending they weren't listening. This was entertainment now, watching the new arrival get needled, seeing how she'd react to being questioned by someone who actually belonged here. Sarah held Baxter's gaze for a long moment. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small metal pin, no bigger than a thumbnail. It was scratched, dented, the kind of thing you'd throw away unless you knew what it meant. She placed it on the desk between them. "That's a Dragon Eye operator pin," she said quietly. "There were 12 of us who went in. I'm the only one who came back." The room went absolutely silent. Baxter stared at the pin, his grin fatting like smoke in wind. He straightened, took a step back. Sorry, I didn't." "You didn't know," Sarah finished for him. She picked up the pin, returned it to her pocket. "Most people don't. That's intentional." She turned back to her screen, dismissing him without another word. Baxter retreated, his face red, his coffee forgotten. The other officers found sudden interest in their own work, screens and documents and anything that wasn't the woman who just reminded them that assumptions were dangerous. Colonel Vance had watched the entire exchange from across the room. Now he walked over, his expression unreadable. He stood beside Sarah's workstation, hands clasped behind his back, and studied her screen for a moment. "You find what you're looking for?" he asked. "Getting there." Sarah highlighted a section of code, made a note in her notebook. "Your system's been compromised." Every nearby officer froze. "Explain," Vance said, his voice sharp. Sarah pulled up a series of access logs, displaying them on the main screen so everyone could see. "Someone's been siphoning data for the past 6 weeks. Small amounts, irregular intervals designed to avoid detection. But they're following the same pattern we saw in Dragon Eye. Same signature, same methodology." "That's impossible," Lyle interjected, stepping forward. "I've personally reviewed every access log. There's no breach." Sarah looked at him. "Then you missed it." "I don't miss things," Lyle said, his voice rising. "I've been doing this for 15 years. If there was a breach, I would have found it." "And yet," Sarah gestured to the screen, "there it is." Lyle's face went through several expressions, settling on something between embarrassment and anger. Those logs are corrupted. It's a false positive." "It's a security breach," Sarah corrected. "And whoever's behind it has been accessing classified mission details, personnel records, and real-time operational data. If they're following the Dragon Eye playbook, they're selling it to whoever pays the best price." The room erupted in overlapping voices, officers arguing, questioning, demanding explanations. Vance raised one hand and silence fell immediately. "Can you track them?" he asked Sarah. "Already am." Her fingers moved across the keyboard, lines of code scrolling past too fast for most people to follow. "They're using a proxy chain, but they're sloppy. Probably think nobody's looking closely enough to catch them." She paused, typed something else, then sat back. "Found them." "Who?" Vance demanded. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the screen, at a name she recognized, and something cold settled in her chest. She'd hoped she was wrong. She'd wanted to be wrong. "Sir," she said carefully, "this is going to be a problem." "How do you tell someone their hero is a traitor?" The name on Sarah's screen glowed like an accusation. Major Kenneth Doyle. The same officer who'd whispered about her an hour ago. The same officer who'd been entrusted with supply logistics and security clearances. The same officer who just walked out of the operations room 5 minutes earlier, coffee in hand, completely unaware that his entire career was about to implode. Colonel Vance leaned over Sarah's shoulder, reading the data himself, verifying what she'd found. His face hardened into something carved from granite. Around them, officers were starting to notice the shift in atmosphere, the way Vance's posture had gone rigid, the way Sarah sat very still at her workstation, her expression carefully neutral. "You're certain?" Vance's voice was barely above a whisper. "The access patterns match his personal login credentials," Sarah said. "He's been careful, spacing out the data pulls, using routine system checks as cover. But he got greedy 3 days ago. Pulled an entire mission file in one session. That's what flagged my attention." Vance straightened. "Lieutenant Cole," he called out, and a young officer snapped to attention. "Find Major Doyle. Bring him here. Don't tell him why." Cole nodded and left quickly, his boots echoing in the sudden quiet. The other officers in the room sensed something major unfolding, but nobody dared ask questions. They just watched, waited, their work forgotten. Sarah closed out several windows on her screen, leaving only the damning evidence displayed clearly. She'd seen this before, the moment when loyalty and duty crashed into each other and someone's world shattered. She didn't enjoy it, but she never looked away from it either. Doyle returned within minutes, trailing behind Lieutenant Cole with an expression somewhere between confusion and irritation. "Sir, you needed me." He glanced at Sarah, then away, his discomfort with her presence still obvious. "Stand there," Vance said, pointing to a spot in front of Sarah's workstation. "Look at that screen." Doyle obeyed, his annoyance shifting to curiosity. then to recognition, then to something that looked like panic, though he tried to cover it quickly. "Sir, I don't understand what." "Those are your login credentials," Sarah said. "Accessing classified files, copying them to an external server. Would you like to explain why?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Doyle's voice was steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. "Those logs must be falsified. Someone's setting me up." "Someone?" Sarah pulled up another window. "Let me show you the bank transfers. Offshore account. Small deposits corresponding exactly with each data breach. Total of $70,000 over 6 weeks." The room felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out. Officers were staring now, openly, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Doyle was one of them, had served with them, shared meals and jokes and the daily grind of military life. And now he was standing there, exposed, caught, with nowhere to run and no lies good enough to save him. "That's not mine," Doyle said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "I don't have an offshore account." Sarah typed something and a scanned document appeared on screen. "That's your signature on the account application, your passport number, your mother's maiden name as the security question." She looked up at him. "Want me to keep going?" Doyle's face crumbled, just collapsed inward like a building losing its supports. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. His hands were shaking now, visible tremors that he couldn't hide. "Why?" Vance's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Why would you do this?" Doyle swallowed hard. "I needed the money. My daughter's medical bills, the treatments aren't covered by insurance, and I was drowning in debt, and someone contacted me, said they just needed routine reports, nothing sensitive, nothing that would hurt anyone." "You gave them mission specs," Sarah said flatly. "Operational details, personnel locations. That's not routine reports. That gets people killed." "I didn't think," Doyle stopped himself, realizing how pathetic it sounded. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." "Meaning doesn't matter," Vance said. "Actions matter, consequences matter." He turned to Lieutenant Cole. "Detain Major Doyle. Call security forces. I want him in confinement within 10 minutes." Two military police officers who'd been standing quietly by the door moved forward. They took Doyle by the arms, professional and impersonal, and led him out. He didn't resist. He just walked, his head down, his career over, his life imploding with every step. The room stayed silent for a long time after he was gone. Finally, Captain Reynolds, a logistics officer who'd been watching from the back of the room, spoke up. "How did you find it so fast? Lyall's been monitoring these systems for months." Sarah glanced at Major Lyall, who stood frozen near his own workstation, his face pale. "I knew what to look for. Dragon Eye was compromised the same way. Same pattern, same methodology. When I saw the clearance structure here, I knew someone had copied the playbook." "You should have reported this through proper channels," Lyall said, his voice tight. "You don't just waltz in here and accuse a field officer without going through the chain of command." "The chain of command was part of the problem," Sarah replied. "Doyle had access because people trusted him, because nobody thought to look closely at someone who'd been here for years, who showed up every day, who did his job." She closed her laptop. "Trust is good until it kills you." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "So what now? We just assume everyone's a traitor." "No," Sarah stood, slinging her canvas bag over her shoulder. "You do your jobs professionally. You verify everything. You trust, but you verify harder." She looked around the room at all the faces watching her, some grateful, some resentful, all uncertain. "That's how you stay alive. That's how you keep other people alive." Colonel Vance nodded. "Commander Mitchell is running point on the security audit. Whatever she needs, whoever she needs to talk to, you cooperate fully. This is not a request." Sarah could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken questions, the resistance brewing beneath professional courtesy. She was an outsider who just exposed one of their own. She was a reminder that their systems had failed, that their vigilance hadn't been enough. Nobody liked being reminded of their failures. But she'd been through worse resistance. She'd been dismissed by better people in worse circumstances. This was just another day, another mission, another room full of people who'd eventually learn to either respect her work or get out of her way. She turned to Vance. "I'll need access to personnel files, complete access, no redactions. You'll have it within the hour. And I need a secure workspace, somewhere quiet where I can analyze data without interruption. There's an office on the 3rd floor. It's yours." Sarah nodded and headed for the door. As she passed Lyle, he spoke up, his voice sharp with wounded pride. "You made me look incompetent." She paused, turned to face him. "You were incompetent. You missed a security breach that lasted 6 weeks. That's not my fault, that's yours." She let that sit for a moment, then added more gently, "But now you know what to look for. Now you can do better. That's the only thing that matters." She left before he could respond, walking out of the operations room and into the corridor, her footsteps echoing on polished floors. Behind her, the whispers started again, but they were different now. Less mocking, more uncertain. The woman in civilian clothes had just torn their security apart and put it back together again in under 3 hours. Some people hated her for it. Some people respected it. Sarah didn't care which camp they fell into. She had work to do, and their opinions were just noise in the background. She found the office Vance had mentioned, a small room with a desk, a computer, and a window overlooking the base. She set her bag down, pulled out her still damp notebook, and opened it to a fresh page. Then she got to work because that's what she did. That's what she'd always done. Expose the lies, find the truth, let the pieces fall where they would. Sometimes justice doesn't ask permission. It just arrives and starts counting. What makes a soldier cry in a bathroom stall? 3 days passed before Sarah found the next problem, and by then the base had developed a strange relationship with her presence. Some officers went out of their way to be helpful, offering information and access before she even asked. Others avoided her entirely, taking longer routes through the base to dodge her path, speaking in hushed tones when she entered a room. The whispers followed her everywhere. Dragon Eye Operative, the woman who caught Doyle, the one with clearance that nobody questions. Sarah ignored all of it. She worked 16-hour days in her 3rd-floor office, surrounded by printouts and laptop screens and her water-stained notebook filling up with observations and connections. She ate meals alone in the corner of the mess hall, her tray always the same: protein, vegetables, water. No coffee. Coffee made her think too much about bunkers in the desert, about nights when staying awake meant staying alive. On the 4th day, she received a message through the secure system. "Report to conference room C 1400 hours. Pentagon briefing." She arrived 5 minutes early, which put her in the room alone. The space was set up for video conferencing, a large screen dominating one wall, comfortable chairs arranged around a polished table. Sarah sat near the back, her canvas bag on the floor beside her, her black card clipped to her jacket where everyone could see it. She'd learned that lesson. When people could see your authority, they spent less time questioning it. Officers filtered in gradually. Colonel Vance, Captain Reynolds, Major Lyle, who'd barely spoken to Sarah since the Doyle incident, Lieutenant Baxter, who now couldn't seem to meet her eyes, Sergeant Ruiz from the gate, who'd been reassigned to operations after the handcuff incident had appeared in someone's report. They all took seats, maintaining careful distances from each other, from Sarah, like they were arranging themselves for maximum defensive positioning. At exactly 1400 hours, the screen flickered to life. General Crowley's face appeared, his 3 stars visible on his uniform, his expression severe enough to make the room collectively sit up straighter. He was in his 60s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many young soldiers die for stupid reasons. "Good afternoon," Crowley said, his voice carrying that particular authority that came from 40 years of military service. "I'm sure you're all wondering why Commander Mitchell is currently stationed at Fort Crestwood." The officers exchanged glances. Sarah remained still, watching the screen. Operation Dragon Eye, Crowley continued, was a deep-cover intelligence mission conducted in hostile territory. The details remain classified above your clearance levels, but what you need to know is this. It was successful because of Commander Mitchell's actions. She spent 19 months undercover, gathering intelligence that prevented a coordinated terrorist attack on multiple U.S. installations. He paused, letting that sink in. Her entire team was killed in the extraction. She survived by spending 4 days alone in a collapsed bunker, injured, with limited supplies, waiting for rescue that almost didn't come. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. She hadn't wanted this story told, hadn't asked for this explanation. But Crowley was doing it anyway, forcing these people to understand what they'd dismissed at the gate, what they'd mocked in the operations room. She was awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal, Crowley continued. She was offered command positions. She was given every accommodation the military could provide, and she turned it all down because she doesn't care about recognition. She cares about the work. Now Crowley looked directly at the camera, and it felt like he was looking at each of them individually. Commander Mitchell is at your base because we have credible intelligence that the same network that compromised Dragon Eye is attempting to compromise your operations. She's not there to make you feel comfortable. She's there to keep you alive. I suggest you let her do her job. The screen went black. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Vance cleared his throat. Commander Mitchell has full authority to conduct interviews, access personnel files, and investigate any aspect of base operations she deems necessary. If she asks you a question, you answer it. If she makes a recommendation, you implement it. Clear. A chorus of "Yes, sir" rippled around the table. Sarah stood. I'll need to interview everyone with access to classified systems, starting with anyone who's had contact with Major Doyle in the past 6 months. That's half the base, Reynolds protested. Then I have a lot of work to do. Sarah picked up her bag. I'll start with command staff. Colonel, can I have your conference room for the afternoon? It's yours. The interviews lasted 3 days. Sarah sat across from officers and enlisted personnel, asking the same questions in different ways, watching for inconsistencies, for nervous tics, for the tells that people couldn't help but display when they were hiding something. Most of them were clean, worried about their careers, anxious about saying the wrong thing but fundamentally honest. Then she interviewed Lieutenant Commander Hayes. Hayes was 42, a supply logistics officer with 20 years of service and a reputation for efficiency. She walked into the conference room with her shoulders back, her uniform impeccable, her expression professional but cold. She sat down across from Sarah without waiting to be invited. I don't appreciate being interrogated like a criminal, Hayes said immediately. I've served this country for 2 decades. My record is spotless. I'm not interrogating you, Sarah replied calmly. I'm interviewing you. There's a difference. Feels the same from where I'm sitting. Sarah opened her notebook, reviewed some notes. You worked closely with Major Doyle. How would you characterize your professional relationship? We collaborated on supply chain logistics. He handled procurement, I handled distribution. It was efficient. Did he ever ask you unusual questions? Request information outside his normal scope? No, Hayes's answer was quick, defensive. We talked about work, that's it. Sarah looked up from her notes, studying Hayes's face. The woman's jaw was tight, her hands clasped on the table with enough force that her knuckles were white. Defensive posture, elevated stress response. But that could just be the situation, the weight of being questioned by someone with level Zeta clearance. Did Doyle ever mention financial difficulties? Hayes hesitated, just for a second, but Sarah caught it. I don't recall. You don't recall, or he didn't mention it? I don't recall, Hayes repeated, her voice harder. Sarah made a note. Did you have any knowledge of Doyle's activities before his arrest? No, I was as shocked as everyone else. I see. Sarah closed her notebook, a deliberate gesture that made Hayes relax slightly. Then Sarah pulled out her laptop, opened it, and turned it so Hayes could see the screen. These are supply requisition forms, 12 of them over the past 6 weeks, all signed by you, all for equipment that was never delivered to the requesting units. Hayes went very still. Her face, which had been merely tense before, now looked carved from marble. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake. The equipment was ordered, paid for, and logged as delivered, but the units never received it, which means it went somewhere else. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Where did it go, Commander Hayes? I don't know. Doyle handled the final distribution. Doyle's records show the equipment was marked as delivered to your facility. Your signature is on the confirmation forms. Hayes's hands unclenched, then clenched again. A muscle in her jaw twitched. He must have forged my signature. Did he forge your digital access codes too? Because those deliveries were logged using your personal credentials, at times when you were scheduled to be on duty. The silence in the room was absolute. Hayes stared at the laptop screen, her breathing shallow, her face losing color. Sarah waited, patient, because this was the moment when people either broke or built a wall so high nothing would scale it. Hayes broke. Was supposed to be small, she whispered. Just a few items, surplus equipment that wouldn't be missed. He said he had a buyer, someone who paid well, and we could split it. I thought. She stopped, swallowed hard. My son has autism, severe. The therapy costs more than my salary covers. I thought I could do it once, maybe twice, just enough to catch up on bills. But Doyle kept asking for more. He said we were in too deep to stop, that if I backed out he'd report me and I'd lose everything. Sarah closed her laptop. So you gave him access to your credentials. I had no choice. You always have a choice, Sarah said quietly. You just chose wrong. Hayes looked up and her eyes were wet. What happens now? Now you write down everything. Every item you diverted, every transaction, every communication with Doyle. You cooperate fully with the investigation. And maybe, that counts for something when they decide your sentence. My son will be taken care of, Sarah interrupted. There are military family support programs, legal assistance funds. He won't suffer because of your choices, but you will. Hayes put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook, silent sobs that she was trying desperately to contain. Sarah stood, gathered her things, and walked to the door. She paused there, looking back at the broken woman at the table. For what it's worth, Sarah said, I believe you about your son. I believe you thought you were helping him. But you helped yourself right into a court-martial, and that's something you'll have to carry. She left Hayes there and went to find Colonel Vance. The next 48 hours were a controlled chaos of arrests, investigations, and damage control. Hayes was detained. 3 other officers were implicated in the supply diversion scheme. The base's entire logistics operation was shut down for audit, and Sarah sat in her third-floor office, compiling reports, answering questions from Pentagon investigators, and trying not to think about the fact that she just destroyed 5 careers in less than a week. Late on the second night, she went to the bathroom on her floor, one of those industrial military bathrooms with tile walls and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly dead. She was washing her hands when she heard it, someone crying in one of the stalls. Quiet, controlled, the kind of crying that came from someone trying desperately not to be heard. Sarah dried her hands slowly. She should leave, should give whoever it was their privacy, but something made her pause. You okay in there? She asked the closed stall door. The crying stopped abruptly, a long silence, then I'm fine. Sarah recognized the voice. Sergeant Ruiz. The same sergeant who'd handcuffed her at the gate, who'd dumped her bag in the gravel, who'd smirked while doing it. You don't sound fine, Sarah said. Another silence. Then the stall door opened. Ruiz stood there, her face blotchy, her eyes red, all her earlier confidence completely gone. She looked young suddenly, stripped of the armor that rank and attitude provided. "I'm sorry," Ruiz said, her voice breaking, "for what I did at the gate, for how I treated you. I've been terrified you'd report me, get me demoted or worse, and I deserve it. I was cruel to you for no reason except I thought I could get away with it." Sarah studied her for a moment. "You think I'm in here to punish you, aren't you?" "No," Sarah leaned against the sink. "You made a mistake, you apologized, that's the end of it." "But I could have, you could have." Ruiz couldn't seem to finish the thought. "Could have done a lot of things," Sarah agreed. "But I didn't, because holding grudges is exhausting and I've got actual problems to solve." She paused. "Why are you crying?" Ruiz wiped her face with her sleeve. "Hayes was my mentor. She taught me everything when I first got here. And now she's arrested, her career's over, and I keep thinking about how I never noticed. How I worked beside her every day and never saw that she was struggling, that she needed help. What kind of sergeant am I if I can't see when my own people are drowning?" Sarah understood that weight, had carried it herself in darker times. The kind who cares enough to cry about it, that's not nothing. Doesn't feel like enough. It never does. Sarah pushed off from the sink. But you show up tomorrow. You do your job better. You pay attention to your people. You remember this feeling the next time someone seems off, seems stressed, seems like they're barely holding it together. And maybe you can stop the next haze before they make the choice that destroys them. Ruiz nodded, wiping her eyes again. "Thank you for not reporting me for this." "Don't thank me yet," Sarah said. "Just be better, that's the only thanks that matters." She left Ruiz there, walked back to her office, and sat in the dark for a long time, staring out the window at the base below. Lights glowed in buildings across the compound. Soldiers moved between posts. Helicopters droned in the distance. The machinery of military life continuing, indifferent to individual suffering, to individual growth. Sarah thought about Hayes's son, about Ruiz's tears, about the weight of catching bad people and realizing they were still people, just people who'd made terrible choices for understandable reasons. Sometimes justice doesn't feel like victory, it just feels heavy. Why would someone risk everything to sit at an empty lunch table? The base fell into a new rhythm after the arrests. Operations continued, missions were planned and executed, soldiers did their jobs with professional efficiency. But something had shifted in how they looked at Sarah Mitchell. The mockery was gone, replaced by something more complex, respect mixed with wariness, gratitude layered over resentment. She was the woman who'd saved them from a security breach. She was also the woman who'd exposed their failures and sent their colleagues to court-martials. Sarah felt the weight of their stares every time she walked through the base. She'd felt it before in different contexts, different places. Being seen but not welcomed. Being needed but not wanted. It was familiar territory, lonely territory. But she'd learned long ago that loneliness was just another condition you adapted to, like cold weather or insufficient sleep. On the 8th day of her assignment, she entered the mess hall for lunch. The space was crowded, full of voices and the clatter of trays, soldiers in various uniforms grabbing quick meals between duties. Sarah got her usual, grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, water. She turned with her tray, scanning the room for an empty seat. That's when she noticed it. Every table she approached seemed to fill up just before she got there. Soldiers who'd been sitting alone suddenly had friends join them. Groups that had empty chairs somehow became completely full between one blink and the next. It was coordinated without being obvious, spontaneous without being accidental. They were freezing her out. Sarah stood in the middle of the mess hall, her tray in hand, and understood what was happening. Someone had made the decision that she was too dangerous to be close to. Too much risk of saying the wrong thing, of being the next person investigated, the next career destroyed. So they'd chosen silence, chosen distance, chosen to make her invisible through the simple act of filling every available space before she could reach it. She could have pulled rank, could have told someone to move to make room, to remember that she had clearance that exceeded most of theirs. But that would prove their point, that she was dangerous, that proximity to her meant submission to authority they resented. Instead, she walked to the corner of the mess hall where a single table sat empty, isolated from the main seating area. It was the table where nobody sat, the spot reserved for people in disgrace or isolation. She set her tray down, pulled out a chair, and sat alone. The conversations around the room continued, but she could feel the awareness, the sidelong glances, the unspoken question. How would the woman with level Zeta clearance handle being shunned? Sarah ate her chicken methodically. She didn't hurry, didn't show discomfort, just sat there, alone in a crowded room, and finished her meal at her own pace. When she was done, she cleared her tray, disposed of her trash, and walked out with her head up and her steps measured. She'd shown them nothing, given them no reaction. That was its own form of power. But that night, alone in her third-floor office, she allowed herself a moment of heaviness. She sat at her desk, the lights off, the base spread out below her window like a constellation of human activity, and felt the familiar ache of being necessary but unwanted. She'd felt it in Dragon Eye, when her team had respected her skills but never quite trusted her instincts. She'd felt it during her recovery, when nurses and doctors had treated her injuries but avoided her eyes. She felt it now, in this base where she'd saved people who didn't want to be saved, not by her, not by an outsider who reminded them of their vulnerabilities. The next day, she entered the mess hall at the same time, got the same meal, turned with her tray and saw the same coordinated avoidance, tables filling up with impossible timing. She walked to her isolated corner table and sat down alone. But this time, someone followed her. Lieutenant Marcus Cole, a young officer she'd barely spoken to, set his tray down across from her without asking permission. He was maybe 25, with earnest eyes and a nervous energy that made him seem younger. "Mind if I join you, ma'am?" Sarah looked at him, then at the rest of the mess hall. She could see other soldiers watching, their conversations pausing, waiting to see what would happen. Cole sitting with her was a statement, an act of defiance against the unspoken agreement to isolate her. "It's a free country," Sarah said. "Have a seat." Cole sat, and she could see his hands trembling slightly as he opened his milk carton. He was scared, scared of what this would cost him, what it would mean for his standing with his peers. But he'd done it anyway. "I wanted to thank you," Cole said quietly, "for catching Doyle and Hayes. My best friend is deployed in a unit that would have been hit if that intelligence had reached the wrong people. You probably saved his life." Sarah had heard gratitude before. It usually came from people far away, safe behind desks, who could afford to be grateful because they'd never been in danger themselves. Hearing it from someone young, someone who understood the direct consequences of her work, hit differently. "Just doing my job," she said. Still, Cole took a bite of his sandwich, chewed, swallowed. "People are being stupid, avoiding you like you're contagious. It's cowardly." "It's human," Sarah corrected. "They're scared, that's reasonable." "You don't seem scared of anything." Sarah almost smiled. "I'm scared of plenty, I just don't show it, that's different." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Around them, the mess hall had returned to its usual noise level, but Sarah could still feel the attention, the awareness that their table was being observed and judged. Then someone else approached. Sergeant Ruiz, carrying her tray, her expression determined. She sat down beside Cole without saying anything, just started eating like this was the most natural thing in the world. Then another soldier. Then two more. Within 10 minutes, Sarah's isolated corner table had become the most crowded spot in the mess hall, filled with officers and enlisted personnel who decided that solidarity was more important than safety, that standing beside someone who'd done the right thing mattered more than maintaining social currency. Sarah didn't comment on it, didn't thank them. just ate her meal and participated in the small talk that developed around the table, conversations about weather and weekend plans and the new training schedule. Normal things, human things, the kind of connection that happened when people chose courage over comfort. But as they were clearing their trays, Colonel Vance approached the table. The conversations died immediately, soldiers snapping to attention. Vance looked at Sarah, then at the others, his expression unreadable. "Commander Mitchell," he said, "when you're finished here, I need you in my office. We've got a situation." Sarah stood. "Yes, sir." Vance left and the table relaxed slightly. Cole looked at Sarah with concern. "Everything okay?" "Won't know until I get there," Sarah said. She picked up her tray, then paused. "Thank you, all of you, for this." "Don't mention it, ma'am," Ruiz said. "We should have done it from the start." Sarah left the mess hall and headed to Vance's office, her mind already shifting gears, preparing for whatever crisis required her immediate attention. But somewhere in the back of her thoughts, she held onto the image of that crowded table, those soldiers who'd risked social consequences to sit beside her. Sometimes solidarity arrives late, but it still counts. Vance's office was on the second floor of the command building, a space that managed to be both functional and comfortable. Maps covered the walls, commendations and unit photos hung beside shelves of military manuals and operational guidelines. Vance sat behind his desk, and standing beside him was someone Sarah hadn't expected to see. A civilian in a dark suit, mid-40s, with the kind of face that gave away nothing and eyes that assessed everything. "Commander Mitchell," Vance said, "this is Agent Reeves, FBI." Sarah shook Reeves's hand, nodding the firm grip, the professional distance. "What's FBI doing at a military base?" "Following leads," Reeves said. "Your investigation into Major Doyle and Commander Hayes opened a door to something bigger. We think their buyers were part of an organized network trafficking in classified military intelligence. We need your help." Sarah sat down without being invited. "What kind of help?" Reeves pulled out a tablet, displayed a series of photos. "These individuals have been flagged in communications related to the network. We believe they're operating on or around military installations, possibly with inside contacts. We need someone who understands military operations, who can move through these spaces without raising suspicion. Someone with clearance that opens doors." "You need bait," Sarah said flatly. "We need an asset," Reeves corrected. "Someone willing to pose as a potential seller, to make contact with the network and help us identify key players." Sarah looked at Vance. "You approve this?" "It's your call," Vance said, "but Pentagon agrees it's worth pursuing. This network has been operating for at least 2 years. We need to shut them down." Sarah thought about Dragon Eye, about 19 months undercover, about the weight of pretending to be someone she wasn't until she almost forgot who she really was. She thought about the bunker, the collapse, the 4 days alone with nothing but pain and darkness, and the certainty that help wasn't coming. She thought about walking away, saying no, protecting herself from the cost of going back into that particular hell. Then she thought about the young soldiers she'd seen on base, the Coles and Ruizes, and all the others whose lives depended on systems that stayed secure, on intelligence that stayed classified, on people like her doing the hard things so they could focus on their jobs. "When do we start?" Sarah asked. Reeves smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Tomorrow. We'll brief you on the operation parameters tonight." Sarah nodded and stood to leave, but at the door she paused. "Agent Reeves, if this goes wrong, if the network figures out I'm working with you, my life expectancy drops to hours, maybe minutes. You need to understand that before we start." "I understand," Reeves said. "We'll have support in place." "Support is great until it's not," Sarah replied. "Just making sure we're clear on the stakes." She left before Reeves could respond, walked back to her office, and sat in the growing darkness as the sun set over Fort Crestwood. Another mission, another risk, Another chance to do work that nobody would thank her for, that nobody would fully understand. But that had always been her life. Since Dragon Eye, since before. The quiet work. The necessary work. The kind of thing that kept the machinery running while everyone else complained about the noise. Sarah opened her notebook, started making lists, preparing herself mentally for what came next. And somewhere in the process, she realized she wasn't afraid. Not of the mission, not of the danger, not even of the possibility of ending up alone in another bunker with nobody coming to save her. She was just tired, so profoundly tired of being the person who did these things. But tired or not, she'd show up tomorrow. She'd do the work, because someone had to. Sometimes courage isn't fearless, it's just showing up anyway. How do you become invisible in a room full of people watching you? The briefing happened in a secure facility off base, one of those anonymous government buildings that looked like budget architecture from outside and serious consequences from inside. Sarah arrived at 2100 hours, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her black card ready for whatever scanning system they'd implemented. Agent Reeves met her in the lobby, led her through corridors that smelled like recycled air and fluorescent anxiety, and into a conference room where 4 other people waited. 2 FBI agents, both younger than Reeves, both with that particular intensity that came from believing they were saving the world one case at a time. A Pentagon liaison, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes who'd probably forgotten more about military intelligence than most people would ever learn. And Colonel Vance, who'd come to represent Fort Crestwood's investment in this operation. Commander Mitchell, the Pentagon liaison said, extending her hand. I'm Director Chen. Thank you for agreeing to help with this. Sarah shook her hand. Let's see if you're still thanking me when this is over. They sat around a table covered in documents, photos, timelines. Reeves pulled up a presentation on the wall screen, starting with a network diagram that looked like a spider's web. Connections spreading from a central point to dozens of nodes, each node representing a potential contact, a possible leak, a person who might be trading classified intelligence for money. This is what we know, Reeves said, using a laser pointer to highlight key areas. The network calls itself Broken Arrow. They specialize in procuring military intelligence and selling it to the highest bidder. Foreign governments, private military contractors, criminal organizations. They're not picky about their customers. How long have they been operating? Sarah asked. At least 2 years that we can confirm, possibly longer. They're careful, compartmentalized, good at covering their tracks, but Major Doyle and Commander Hayes gave us our first real opening. Their communications led us to a contact, someone they called the broker. Reeves clicked to a new slide, showing surveillance photos of a man in his 40s, nondescript, forgettable. Marcus Trent, former military intelligence, discharged 6 years ago for reasons that were never quite clear. Since then, he's been operating in the gray areas between legal and illegal contracting. Sarah studied Trent's photo. You think he's running Broken Arrow. We think he's a key facilitator. Not the top, but close enough that if we can flip him, we can climb the ladder. And you want me to make contact? We want you to let him make contact with you, Chen corrected. We're going to put out feelers through channels we know Broken Arrow monitors. Let them know there's a disgruntled operative with level Zeta clearance who might be interested in supplementing her income. Someone who survived Dragon Eye but didn't get the recognition she deserved, who feels undervalued and overlooked. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You want me to pretend to be bitter about my service? We want you to give them a believable narrative, Chen said. Someone with your clearance level, with your access, would be an incredible asset to them. But they'll be cautious. They'll test you, verify your story, make sure you're not a plant. Which I am. Which you are, Chen agreed. So we need your cover to be airtight. No inconsistencies, no tells. You have to believe the story you're selling, at least enough to pass their scrutiny. Sarah looked at the faces around the table, at the certainty in their expressions, the confidence that this plan would work. She'd seen that confidence before, in the planning stages of Dragon Eye. She remembered how it had felt before everything went wrong, before her team died, before she ended up buried in rubble with nothing but determination keeping her breathing. "What's my extraction plan if this goes sideways?" she asked. "We'll have surveillance teams watching every meeting," Reeves said. "Body camera, audio feed, GPS tracking. At the first sign of trouble, we pull you out." "That's not an extraction plan, that's hopeful thinking," Sarah replied. "These people are professionals. If they figure out I'm working with you, they'll kill me before your surveillance teams can get through the door. I need a real plan." The room went quiet. Reeves exchanged a glance with Chen, and something passed between them that Sarah couldn't quite read. "We're working on it," Chen said finally. "But Commander, we can't guarantee your safety. You know that. This is high risk, and while we'll do everything possible to keep you protected, there are scenarios where we might not reach you in time." Sarah had expected this answer, had known it was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud, hearing them admit that her life would be secondary to the mission's success, still hit like a weight in her chest. "I need 48 hours," she said, "to prepare, to get my affairs in order." "You have 24, Chen replied. "Broken Arrow moves fast. If we wait too long, they'll find another source or disappear completely. We need to move while they're still interested." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then I'll need files. Everything you have on Trent, on Broken Arrow's operations, on their known contacts. I need to memorize their patterns, understand how they think." "You'll have them within the hour," Reeves said. The briefing continued for another 2 hours, covering operational details, communication protocols, emergency codes. Sarah asked questions, identified potential problems, suggested modifications to the plan that would give her slightly better odds of survival. The FBI agents took notes, occasionally pushing back on her suggestions, eventually conceding most of her points because she'd been doing this kind of work when they were still in training. Finally, as midnight approached, Chen stood and gathered her materials. "Commander Mitchell, I want to be clear about something. What we're asking you to do is dangerous and possibly illegal depending on how the courts interpret entrapment law. If this goes public, if something goes wrong, there will be consequences. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah thought about Fort Crestwood, about the soldiers who'd sat at her lunch table, about Cole's nervous gratitude and Ruiz's tears in the bathroom. She thought about all the people who did their jobs every day without knowing that people like Trent existed, that networks like Broken Arrow were selling their safety to anyone with enough money. "I'm prepared," she said. She left the secure facility at 100 hours, drove back to Fort Crestwood through empty roads, and returned to her third-floor office. The files Reeves had promised were already in her secure email, encrypted and waiting. She opened them and started reading. Marcus Trent had been a good soldier once. Commendations for his intelligence work, positive performance reviews, recommendations for promotion. Then something had shifted. His evaluations became mixed. Complaints about his attitude, about cutting corners, about prioritizing efficiency over protocol. Then an investigation into possible security violations, charges filed and later dropped due to insufficient evidence. Then his discharge, sudden and final. Sarah recognized the pattern. She'd seen it before in people who'd started with good intentions and gradually convinced themselves that the rules didn't apply to them, that their intelligence justified their choices, that they deserved more than they were getting. She read everything: Trent's service record, his post-military employment history, his known associates, his financial records showing money that appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. She studied surveillance photos, listened to audio recordings of his voice, memorized the way he moved and spoke and presented himself. By the time the sun rose over Fort Crestwood, Sarah had become someone new. Not completely new, but shifted enough that she could slide into the role they needed her to play. The bitter operative, the undervalued asset, the woman with access and anger and willingness to cross lines for the right price. She practiced in the mirror, watching her own face as she spoke the words of her cover story, looking for inconsistencies, for moments where her real self showed through. She adjusted her posture, her tone, her mannerisms, became slightly harder, slightly more cynical, slightly more broken than she actually was. The transformation wasn't dramatic, just subtle shifts in how she held herself, how she responded to questions, how she let silence hang in conversations. But those shifts were everything in undercover work. They were the difference between believable and transparent, between life and death. At 800 hours, her secure phone buzzed. A text from Reeves, "First contact tonight, anonymous online forum, username Blue Horizon 47, wait for approach, do not initiate." Sarah deleted the message and walked to the mess hall for breakfast. Her corner table was empty, waiting for her, and she sat alone with her meal. But this time, the isolation felt different. Not like rejection, but like preparation. She was separating herself, creating the psychological space she'd need to become the person Broken Arrow wanted to recruit. Lieutenant Cole walked past, started to approach her table, then paused when he saw her expression. Something in her face must have warned him away, because he nodded once and kept walking. Sarah watched him go and felt a small pang of something like regret. She'd let people in, just a little, let them sit at her table and share her isolation. Now she was closing that door again, returning to the kind of solitude that kept her sharp and dangerous and alone. Later that evening, in her office with the door locked and the windows dark, Sarah logged into the forum Reeves had mentioned. It was an obscure corner of the internet, one of those places where military contractors and intelligence operatives gathered to share information and make connections that couldn't happen through official channels. Her cover identity had been active there for weeks, built by FBI cyber specialists who knew how to create believable digital footprints. She waited. At 21:47 hours, a private message appeared. "I hear you're between contracts, interested in opportunities." Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it. The moment where she committed, where she stepped into the role and couldn't step back without consequences. She thought about all the warnings, all the risks, all the reasons to say no. Then she typed, "Depends on the opportunity and the compensation." The response came quickly. "Both are substantial for someone with your background. Let's talk details. There's a coffee shop in Arlington, the Daily Grind. Tomorrow, 1400 hours. Come alone." Sarah didn't respond immediately. Made them wait, made them wonder if she'd show up or ghost them. Let them think she was considering, weighing options, being appropriately cautious. Finally, "How will I know you?" "You won't need to, we'll know you." The conversation ended. Sarah closed her laptop and sat in the darkness, listening to her own breathing, feeling her heartbeat steady and slow. She was good at this. Too good. The transformation from Sarah Mitchell, decorated operative with trauma she carried quietly, into someone willing to betray everything she'd fought for, was easier than it should have been. Maybe that's what scared her most. Not the danger of the mission, but how comfortable she felt putting on this mask, how naturally the lies came, how little distance existed between who she was and who she was pretending to be. She'd been undercover too long in Dragon Eye, had spent too many months being someone else, until the lines blurred and she wasn't sure which version of herself was real. She'd sworn after her extraction that she'd never do that again, never lose herself in a role, never forget which side she was fighting for. And here she was doing exactly that, again. Sometimes the person you pretend to be starts feeling more honest than the person you actually are. Sarah stood, gathered her things, and left the office. She had one day to prepare, to shore up her defenses, to make sure she remembered who she was underneath the mask she'd be wearing. One day before she walked into that coffee shop, and let Marcus Trent or whoever was watching decide if she was worth recruiting or eliminating. One day before everything either worked perfectly or collapsed catastrophically. She'd faced worse odds before, survived worse missions, came back from situations that should have killed her. But this time felt different. This time felt like maybe she wouldn't come back at all, or if she did, maybe she wouldn't recognize the person who walked out of the wreckage. Sometimes bravery and stupidity look exactly the same. The only difference is whether you survive. What does silence sound like when everything depends on what you say next? The daily grind was exactly the kind of place that looked safe and wasn't. Located in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a pharmacy, it had wide windows, comfortable seating, and the kind of generic coffee shop atmosphere that let people meet without attracting attention. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, parked 2 blocks away, and walked past the entrance twice to check for surveillance, for backup, for anyone watching who shouldn't be. She saw nothing obvious, which meant either they were very good or very confident. At exactly 1400 hours, she entered the shop. The smell of coffee and pastries hit immediately, mixing with the low hum of conversation from scattered customers. Students with laptops, a few business types in suits, a couple having what looked like a relationship discussion in hushed, intense tones. Normal people doing normal things, completely unaware that something dangerous was happening in their safe afternoon space. Sarah ordered coffee at the counter, her movements calm and unhurried. While she waited, she scanned the room systematically, cataloging faces and positions. 2 men near the back corner who weren't talking to each other but kept glancing at the entrance. A woman by the window who had a book open but hadn't turned a page in 5 minutes. And sitting alone at a table dead center, Marcus Trent. He looked exactly like his surveillance photos. Average height, average build, brown hair going gray at the temples, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that could have come from any department store. Nothing about him stood out. That was the point. People like Trent survived by being forgettable, by sliding through rooms without leaving impressions. Sarah collected her coffee and walked to his table. She didn't ask permission, just pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "You're late," Trent said mildly. "No, I'm exactly on time. You're early." Sarah sipped her coffee, maintaining eye contact, trying to scope out the environment, see if I brought friends. "Did you? Would I tell you if I had?" Trent smiled, and for the first time Sarah saw what had probably charmed his way through military intelligence. The smile was genuine, reaching his eyes, making him seem trustworthy and reasonable. "Fair point. Though if you had brought backup, my people would have already told me." "Your people," Sarah repeated. She let her gaze drift to the 2 men in the back corner, then to the woman by the window. Subtle. Necessary. Trent leaned back in his chair, relaxed and confident. "You understand how these meetings work. Trust but verify." "I don't trust anyone," Sarah said. "That's how I've stayed alive this long." "Smart, though it must make for a lonely existence." Sarah didn't respond to that. Instead, she studied Trent carefully, looking for tells, for weaknesses, for anything she could use. He studied her right back, and she could see him cataloging details. The faded jacket she still wore despite having access to new uniforms, the coffee order that was basic black with nothing added, the way she sat with her back to the wall and clear sightlines to all exits. "I've read about you," Trent said. "Operation Dragon Eye. Impressive work. 19 months undercover, entire team eliminated in extraction. You survived alone for 4 days. That takes a special kind of determination." "Or a special kind of stupid," Sarah replied, "depending on your perspective. And yet you're still doing it, still taking orders, still risking your life for people who don't appreciate what you sacrifice." Trent tilted his head slightly. "That must get exhausting." This was the test. Sarah could feel it, the way he was probing for her motivation, for the wound he could exploit. She let silence hang for a moment, let him think she was considering her answer carefully. "What do you want, Mr. Trent?" "Marcus, please, and I want what you want to make the work worth it, to get compensated appropriately for skills that are in high demand." He pulled out a tablet, slid it across the table. I represent a network of professionals who facilitate information exchange. We work with clients who need specific intelligence, and we work with sources who have access to that intelligence. Everyone profits. Everyone stays safe. Sarah looked at the tablet without touching it. The screen showed a list of numbers, payment figures running from 5 digits into 6. You're offering me money to sell classified information. I'm offering you fair compensation for your expertise, Trent corrected. The information flows whether you're involved or not. All we're doing is creating a marketplace where that flow is efficient and profitable. Treason with better marketing. Capitalism, Trent said. The military uses you, takes your skills, your time, your willingness to die for ideology, and gives you a medal and a handshake. We're just suggesting you get paid what you're actually worth. Sarah picked up the tablet, scrolled through the numbers. Her FBI training had covered this. Act interested but not desperate. Ask questions that showed sophistication. Demonstrate value without overpromising. But underneath the training, underneath the role she was playing, she felt something else. Curiosity about what made someone like Trent choose this path. What kind of rationalization let him sleep at night after selling out his country? What kind of information are we talking about? She asked. Mission parameters, personnel deployments, technical specifications, anything that's classified and marketable. Trent reclaimed the tablet, tapped a few commands, then slid it back. Here's a sample request from a current client. They're looking for details on a counterterrorism operation scheduled for next quarter. If you could provide preliminary intelligence, the payment would be $75,000. Sarah read the request. It was specific, detailed, exactly the kind of information that would get people killed if it reached hostile actors. She thought about the soldiers at Fort Crestwood, about Cole and Ruiz, and all the others whose lives depended on operations staying classified. She thought about what would happen if intelligence like this was compromised. Then she set the tablet down and met Trent's eyes. I'm interested, but I need assurances. If I do this, if I provide you with intelligence, I need to know I'm protected, that you're not just going to take what I give you and leave me exposed. Of course, Trent said smoothly. We have protocols, compartmentalized communication, dead drops, encrypted channels. Your identity stays protected unless you choose to reveal it, and we've been doing this successfully for years. Our track record speaks for itself. Who else is in your network? I can't share specifics about other sources, operational security, but I can tell you we have people in every branch, every intelligence agency. You'd be joining a community of professionals who understand that loyalty to an institution that doesn't value you is pointless. Sarah nodded slowly, like she was processing this, like she was convincing herself that this was acceptable. Inside, she was memorizing everything. Trent's exact words, his demeanor, the way he framed betrayal as pragmatism. All of it would go into her report, would become evidence for the prosecution. I need time to think about this, she said. Of course, but not too much time. The client needs preliminary intelligence within 2 weeks, and we need to establish trust, verify you can deliver what you're promising. So let's say, Trent checked his watch. 72 hours. If you're in, we'll set up a secure channel and start with something small, a test to make sure we're all on the same page. And if I'm not in? Trent's smile didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold sliding beneath the friendly surface. Then we part as professionals. No hard feelings, no consequences. Though I'd advise you not to discuss this meeting with anyone. That would be problematic. Are you threatening me? I'm advising you. There's a difference. Trent stood, buttoning his jacket. 72 hours, Sarah. Think about what your skills are worth. Think about whether serving an institution that uses you is really where you want to spend your life. He left without another word, walking out of the coffee shop with the 2 men from the back corner trailing behind him. The woman by the window stayed for another few minutes, then followed. Sarah sat alone at the table, her coffee cooling, her mind processing everything that had just happened. Her phone buzzed, a text from Reeves. "Well done. Surveillance captured everything. Stand by for extraction team." Sarah deleted the message and left the coffee shop. She walked back to her car slowly, checking for tails, for anyone watching. She saw nothing, but that meant nothing. Broken Arrow knew she had level Zeta clearance. They knew she'd survived Dragon Eye. They'd be careful, thorough, professional in their surveillance. She drove back to Fort Crestwood, taking random turns, doubling back, using every counter-surveillance technique she'd learned. By the time she arrived at the base, she was reasonably certain nobody had followed her. Reasonably certain, which in this business was the best you could hope for. Colonel Vance was waiting in her office. "Reeves briefed me, said the meet went well." "It went exactly how these things go," Sarah replied, setting down her bag. "Trent made his pitch. I played interested but cautious. We agreed to reconnect in 3 days." "Do you think he bought it?" Sarah sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the meeting and everything to do with what came next. "He bought enough to take the next step, but he's careful. He'll be watching me, verifying my story, looking for inconsistencies. If we're going to do this, we need to make sure every piece of my cover is perfect. FBI's already working on it. They'll create evidence of you being disgruntled, passed over for promotion, complaining about compensation. They'll seed it in military databases, in personnel files, in places where Broken Arrow can find it if they look." "That's a good start," Sarah said. "But Trent will dig deeper. He'll look for personal motivations, for vulnerabilities. He'll want to understand what drives me to betray everything I've fought for." She looked at Vance. "So we need to give him something real, something he'll believe because it's true enough to pass scrutiny." "What are you suggesting?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Dragon Eye, about the 19 months undercover, about the team that died because someone made a mistake, and she survived because she'd been better or luckier or more ruthless. She thought about the 4 days in that bunker, about the darkness and the pain and the absolute certainty that she'd been abandoned. "Use my actual trauma," she said finally. "Make it clear I came back from Dragon Eye broken, that I blame the military for what happened, that I feel betrayed by the people who sent me in and barely got me out. That part's real enough that anyone looking will see the cracks, will understand why I might want revenge or compensation or whatever story we're selling." Vance looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, I don't think." "It's the smart play," she interrupted. "Trent needs to believe I have genuine grievances. The best way to make him believe that is to show him actual pain. I'm okay with it." She wasn't okay with it, but she was willing to do it anyway because that's what the mission required. "All right," Vance said reluctantly. "I'll coordinate with Reeves. They'll adjust your cover story accordingly." After Vance left, Sarah sat alone in the darkness of her office. She thought about the next 72 hours, about the person she'd have to become to convince Trent she was worth recruiting, about how much of herself she'd have to sacrifice to maintain the deception. She'd done it before. She could do it again. She just wasn't sure how much of herself would be left when it was over. 3 days later, Sarah received another message from Blue Horizon 47, ready to proceed. First task, confirm your access level. Provide 1 piece of classified intelligence as verification. Nothing major, just proof you can deliver. This was the moment. Sarah could back out, tell Reeves it was too risky, let someone else take over the operation. Or she could push forward, provide the intelligence the FBI had prepared for her, the carefully crafted information that looked real but was actually designed to feed false data to Broken Arrow. She typed her response, "Access confirmed, stand by for transfer." The FBI had created a document that appeared to contain classified troop movement data, complete with authentic formatting and classification markings. It was good enough to fool casual inspection, but useless to anyone trying to act on the information. Sarah uploaded it to the secure channel Broken Arrow had provided, then waited. 45 minutes later, her phone rang. Unknown number, she answered. "Welcome to Broken Arrow," Trent's voice said. "Your verification was accepted. We're ready to discuss your first real assignment. Tomorrow, same location, same time." He hung up before she could respond. Sarah sat with the phone in her hand, listening to the silence of the disconnected call, thinking about how easy it had been to cross that line. How simple it was to become the person they wanted, to speak their language, to join their network. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered the question she'd been trying not to ask. What if this wasn't pretend? What if the person she was becoming was who she'd always been underneath, and the loyalty and sacrifice had just been a mask all along? She pushed the thought away, got up, prepared for tomorrow's meeting, reminded herself that she was one of the good ones, that she was doing this to stop Broken Arrow, not to join them. But the doubt lingered, quiet and persistent, whispering in the spaces between her thoughts. Sometimes the most dangerous lie is the one you tell yourself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Sarah Mitchell had learned that truth long before Fort Crestwood, before Dragon Eye, before she'd ever worn a uniform or held clearance that frightened people. She'd learned it in a childhood where being heard meant being targeted, where safety came from making yourself small and moving through the world like you were already invisible. The mission with Broken Arrow lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of meeting Trent in anonymous locations, of providing carefully crafted intelligence that looked real enough to fool experts but was actually designed to expose the network's customers, its handlers, its entire operational structure. 6 weeks of being someone she wasn't while forgetting, sometimes, who she actually was. The FBI made arrests on a Tuesday morning, coordinated raids across 4 states, 23 people taken into custody simultaneously. Trent was in his apartment in Arlington when they came for him, still in his bathrobe, still confident that his careful compartmentalization would protect him. It didn't. Sarah's recordings, her testimony, the meticulous documentation of every transaction had built a case that no lawyer could dismantle. She wasn't there for the arrest. She was back at Fort Crestwood in her third-floor office, writing her final report. The window showed the base in early morning light, soldiers moving between buildings, helicopters warming up for training runs, the machinery of military life continuing without pause or acknowledgement of what she'd just done. Colonel Vance came to find her that afternoon. "It's over," he said. "Reeves called. Broken Arrow is finished. They're rolling up the entire network, following leads to customers to other intelligence sellers. You did it." Sarah nodded. She didn't feel victorious, didn't feel anything much beyond tired. "There's going to be commendations," Vance continued. "Recognition from Pentagon, probably another medal to add to whatever collection you're not displaying." "I don't want recognition," Sarah said. "I know, but you're getting it anyway." Vance pulled out a chair, sat down without asking. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to regardless." He smiled briefly. "Why do you keep doing this? You could walk away, take a desk job, teach at a training facility, live a normal life. Instead, you volunteer for operations that could get you killed, that have gotten you almost killed. Why?" Sarah thought about the question, about all the easy answers she could give, all the things that sounded noble or principled or selfless. Then she decided on truth instead. "Because I'm good at it," she said, "and because someone has to do the work that nobody wants to acknowledge exists. The quiet work, the dangerous work, the work that keeps everything running while everyone else gets to pretend the world is safer than it is." "That's it, that's your reason." "That's all the reason I need." Vance stood to leave, paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you were here. I'm glad you caught Doyle and Hayes before they compromised anything critical. I'm glad you helped take down Broken Arrow. And I'm sorry we made you feel unwelcome when you arrived." "Apology accepted," Sarah said. And for what it's worth, I understand why everyone reacted that way. I'm not easy to work with. I don't fit in. I remind people of things they'd rather not think about. Maybe that's exactly why we need you, Vance said. He left. Sarah went back to her report. By evening, it was finished, everything documented, every detail recorded for people who would read it and understand what she'd risked, what she'd sacrificed, what pieces of herself she'd lost in the process. The next morning, she packed her canvas bag, now properly dried but still bearing water stains from that first day's puddle. She left her office without looking back, walked through the base one final time. Some soldiers saluted as she passed. Some nodded respectfully. Some looked away, still uncomfortable with what she represented. At the gate, the guards were different people now, new faces who didn't recognize her, who looked at her civilian clothes and her lack of identification with the same skepticism Jenkins and Diaz had shown weeks ago. Sarah almost smiled at the symmetry. She held out her black card. "I'm checking out." The guard took the card, scanned it, and his eyes widened at whatever appeared on his screen. "Yes, ma'am. Have a safe trip, Commander." Sarah walked through the gate and got into her car. She drove away from Fort Crestwood without looking in the rearview mirror, without sentimentality or regret. The mission was over. The work was done. Time to find the next mission, the next crisis, the next place where her particular skills were needed and unwanted in equal measure. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Commander Mitchell, this is Director Chen. Pentagon has a situation that requires your expertise. Wheels up in 48 hours. Interested?" Sarah read the message twice. Thought about saying no. Thought about taking Vance's suggestion, finding a desk job, living a life that didn't require her to lose pieces of herself in dark places. Then she typed, "Send me the briefing, I'll be ready." Because that's who she was. That's who she'd always been. The person who showed up when the work was hard and the recognition was non-existent and the cost was too high for anyone reasonable to pay. She drove toward the airport, toward whatever came next, carrying her canvas bag and her black card and the weight of missions completed, and scars collected and truths nobody wanted to hear. Some people are loud about their strength, announcing it, demanding recognition. Others are quiet. They just do the work, they show up, they carry the weight, they endure. Sarah Mitchell was the quiet kind. She always had been. And in a world that mistook silence for weakness, that confused humility with inability, that dismissed the unassuming as unimportant, she'd proven again and again that dignity doesn't need a megaphone. It just needs to stand there, solid and unshakable, until everyone else catches up to understanding what they're actually looking at. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and that's always enough.